Welcome to The Blue Dot, Northern Kentucky's premier political podcast, brought to you by the Kenton County Democratic Executive Committee. Welcome back to The Blue Dot podcast for our weekly roundup, where we bring you all the news you need to know in 10 minutes or less. Thanks for joining. I'm Natalie McDonald.
And I'm Brian Kale. Big news this week, Natalie. We invaded not one, but two countries.
A double whammy this week.
Yeah, no kidding. Also, the Kentucky regular legislative session is coming to an end this week, and a whole lot of people were making fools out of themselves, testifying on Capitol Hill, and Dems finally made a strong showing in Texas.
Yes. In Texas, Democrats outnumbered the Republicans in primary voting, which is a rare occurrence in Texas. But it shows enthusiasm of the Democratic base that we've seen not only here in Kentucky, but across the country. But we sure do have a lot to pack in. Do you want to start at the local or national level this week, Brian?
Well, let's start with all the good local stuff and work our way outward.
Sounds like a plan. Well, on Friday, the Kenton County Dems had their 2026 kickoff at the American Legion, where we're joined by Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman as the keynote speaker. And it was really just a great event. I saw a ton of new faces, and people are really fired up to get engaged, which is great.
Yeah, we had quite a few people come up to the Blue Dot booth to learn more about the podcast. And I really liked how all the candidates had tables set up and people could interact and get some FaceTime with them as well.
Yeah, that setup was new. We thought we'd try something different. I think it was really well received by everyone. We also had a few tables set up for our subcommittees. And one of the popular tables was our community action table that focused on precinct involvement. So we had a big map which showed the precincts who had representation and which ones were open. And we currently have 12 open precincts, most of which are in Covington. So there's plenty of opportunity to get involved if anybody is interested. And we also had our visibility and outreach table showcasing all the events we'll be involved in this year. So we'll be doing everything from 4th of July parades, the county fair, Pride, cookouts, and even a dog day at the park. So stay tuned for all of that good stuff coming up this year.
Yeah, that's great. All of this is setting us up to flip seats so that we can have greater representation in the legislature to pass good bills for the people of Kentucky. We've highlighted quite a few bills over the last few weeks, but the regular legislative session is winding down. This week marked the last days to introduce new bills into the Kentucky House and Senate. The next deadline will be March 31st through April 1st, which are concurrence days, essentially a tug of war between the House and the Senate over specific wording of a bill.
Yeah, tug of war is definitely a good analogy because for a bill to become law, both the House and the Senate must pass the exact same version of that bill. So they duke it out and they either concur or refuse to concur. If they refuse to concur, the bill usually goes to a conference committee, and this is basically a small group of lawmakers from both the House and the Senate. They get together in a room, they try to negotiate, they try to compromise, and it gets a little crazy because of the huge number of bills they keep bouncing back and forth, and usually for minimal changes, but it gets pretty busy during this time for sure.
Yeah, and one of those bills we want to highlight, which we talked about last week, is House Bill 299, which would essentially ban devices that can convert semi-automatic firearms into automatic weapons. That bill was passed in the House. This is the ban, was passed in the House by a vote of 65 to 25. All the votes in opposition, not surprisingly, were cast by Republicans, but many of whom stated they were concerned about the constitutionality of the bill.
Yeah, and so that is now in the Senate, where it will be assigned to a standing committee for a hearing. And if it passes there, it'll head to the Senate floor for a final vote before reaching Governor Beshear's desk for signature. So it was one of those kind of rare bills where we had a little bit of bipartisan support as it went through the legislature.
Right. We'll be updating you on all of the important bills as they move through the process. The big ones are House Bill 500, aka the budget bill, which was received in the Senate and referred to the Senate Appropriations and Revenue Committee. Once a final version is passed by both chambers, it goes to Governor Beshear, who has the power of the line item veto on budget bills.
Yeah, he does. He can veto parts of a budget bill rather than the entire bill. However, the legislature can override the veto with a simple majority, but that is something that's a little bit different on budget bills.
Right. And he may say a little bit more about all these bills when he speaks in front of the Northern Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. It's always good to hear from strong transparent leaders like Governor Beshear. So here in Kentucky, we have some sense of normalcy, unlike what we get at the national level.
Crazy. Yeah, last week we said we never know who will be invading when we wake up each morning. And boy, was that ever the case this week.
Yeah, we had a double invasion this week, a super bonus. Not only did we invade Iran, but we also launched military operations in Ecuador.
Yeah, Ecuador is not on my bingo card, so we might look out St. Kitts and Nevis. You may be next on the list. We just never know.
Right? It's crazy. And with most things this administration does, seemingly completely without rationale, the Pentagon did not specify what the new operations would entail or which groups they would focus on, but it does appear to be an extension of Operation Southern Spear, which has so far killed 151 people in strikes on alleged drug boats in the Eastern Pacific and Caribbean.
Yeah, but going back to Ecuador, I have a pop quiz for you, Brian.
Great.
Do you know what Ecuador's largest commodity and primary export is?
Bananas?
Nope. It is crude petroleum.
Of course.
Oil seems to be the common thread of all of the aggressions, and we could probably dedicate an entire hour or two to the war in Iran. But I first wanted to acknowledge that we lost service members, and at least 4 of the soldiers killed were assigned to an Iowa unit operating under the 1st Theater Sustainment Command out of Fort Knox, Kentucky. So our hearts and prayers go out to them and their families and to all of those who are serving right now.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking, and what makes it even harder to bear is that this is increasingly looking like a war of choice, not necessity. This administration has not been able to communicate the why behind its attack on Iran. They have given many accounts: regime change, decapitation enabling the people to form their own government, threat of regional attack by Iran, threat of Iran's near-term nuclear capability, threat of missile technology able to hit the United States. And now, the last I heard, I think we are back to regime change.
Yeah, and some of those theories have also been disputed by the Pentagon. So we're not getting a lot of really good information out of this
No
administration
clue.
whatsoever. But, Iran's government is a terrorist regime. I think we can all agree with that. But even if you believe in the legitimacy of a preemptive attack on this scale, I think everyone can agree that an operation of this sort requires meticulous planning and coordination with our allies, which we have not had any of. We haven't had any ally support other than Israel and probably Saudi Arabia, which Trump and his family has a web of financial entanglement with.
Yeah, exactly. And no surprise, there was none of that from Trump and his administration. Planning, meticulous planning, and specifically Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Case in point, there are tens of thousands of Americans working and living in the region, and the U.S. State Department waited until 3 days into the conflict to then urge these U.S. citizens to evacuate. President Trump even bluntly stated there was no evacuation plan in place because there was no time. The operation, quote, happened very quickly.
Yeah, it's almost like we're just kind of doing this by the seat of our pants, right? And it's just frightening. But, despite the uncertainty that this is causing for the country as well as across the globe, it doesn't make things like the Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs and the Epstein files go away. I think they wanted that, but people are still
Yeah,
talking about it.
distraction.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
right. And both of those things keep getting worse for Trump and the Republicans. The Clintons, especially Hillary, just totally owned the Republicans during her Epstein deposition. Her opening statement was a devastating indictment on the Republican-led committee's process and its hypocrisy. The hearing laid bare the fact that the wrong president and first lady were testifying. Donald and Melania, friends with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell for years, are mentioned thousands of times in the files, and they are the ones who really need to be answering questions.
Yeah, they sure do. And the Republicans aren't helping themselves much with these hearings because it only shines the light on their hypocrisy. But the Oversight Committee has subpoenaed Attorney General Pam Bondi over her completely inept handling of the Epstein files. So this is going to be interesting. I don't think she's going to provide any useful testimony at all, but there does appear to be a crack in the cover up of this whole Epstein debacle. Another point of interest that I saw come through today. Do you remember AutoPen Gate?
Do you remember AutoPen Gate? Right.
Yes, when they were trying to drum up some kind of
That's
controversy
right.
about Biden using an auto pen, which all presidents have done in the past. But anyway, they dropped that because there was zero evidence to there being a case there.
I mean, another case just dropped due to lack of evidence or merit or standing, and that's great news. And on the tariff front, finally, over 2,000 lawsuits have already been filed by companies seeking tariff refunds based upon the Supreme Court's recent ruling that they were unlawful. So this has absolutely overwhelmed both the courts and the DOJ.
Yes, and there's so much we could cover, and we wish we had time to talk about it all, but our 10 minutes are up. And so that is it for the weekly roundup, where the news is fast and the facts are free. Until next time, stay curious, keep the facts in focus, never stop fighting for what matters. Peace out, everybody.